save this last case for the very end because it's one that we won't see a lot of in this class, but I just want to give you a sense of where these might come up. We have a function that has 3 inputs and 2 outputs. We could make all sorts of functions like that, but one that's particularly applicable is called a projection map. So, for example, we could have this function. It would have 3 inputs, x, y, and z, but only 2 outputs. Maybe it only gives you back the x and the z coordinate. So the use of this function would be, suppose we have maybe some space curve. So we have r of t equals x of t, y of t, and z of t. Since this function r has 3 outputs, it could be plugged into this function which has 3 inputs. So we could look at f compose r of t, which would basically just, this function just basically gets rid of the y and gives you back whatever x and z you gave it. So you would have this, the x of t, z of t. So what's happening here is if we look at the original curve r in x, y, z space, here's x, y, and z. If we look at that original curve, it's some curve in space, right? But when we plug it into f, it drops out the y component, and so you just get a curve in the xz plane. So you would see basically the projection or the shadow of this curve that it casts onto the xz plane. So we'd have kind of the projection or shadow curve. So we had this curve in space which was 3-dimensional, and we just project it onto the xz plane, sort of strips it down, and we see its shadow. Now we could have made a different one, right? That maybe here's another example of a function with 3 inputs and 2 outputs. Maybe we would just give back the x and y and just drop out the z. So this function g, if you did g and you plugged in r, you would just get out this plane curve x of t, y, and t, which would just be the shadow that this curve casts in the xy plane. So whatever the shadow of that curve looks like, then that's what the composition of g with your curve would be. So that's why we call them the projection functions. That's just one type of function that has that form, that's basically dropping out one of the variables. We won't see this a lot in the class. I just thought it was kind of fun to mention that you can create these projection functions.